Hans TenDam is truly one of the pioneers in the field of regression therapy. He was one of the first members and a life member of APRT, later ARRT. I know all the letters can be confusing, but it was the Creative Networking Association for professionals who were exploring reincarnation and investigating regression potentials. You've seen his bio and his several books that Hans has authored, as well as articles in the International Journal of Regression Therapy. Hans is also the founder and first president of the Earth Association for Regression Therapy and started the World Congresses. I knew Hans whenever he came to the US and to our meetings. I knew him as a serious thinker and spokesperson from the meetings and seminars that we had in APR2. And when the Netherlands, I think that was the first World Congress, if I'm not mistaken, but whenever it was held in the Netherlands, Jeff Ryan and I knew we had to go. And when we walked through the large building in Amsterdam, where the conference would be held, Hans walked forward to greet us. He immediately lifted me up off of my feet and twirled me in circles.
Did I do that?
You did do that. Do you remember doing that?
Sounds like me, yes.
Every once in a while. So I warn you, it was hilarious. I laughed and laughed. And it was such a fun thing that Hans will always remember. Now, I tend to think of speakers, presenters, as three different types, and I'm sure that there are many more, but this was my thought recently. One is those presenters who take us back to basics, the valuable techniques of grounding our client, avoiding suggestive or leading questions, and ethics, and so many other things that are important in our field, just continuing to ground us in basics, which I think is valuable, extremely valuable. Another presenter would be those who introduce us to new techniques, things that are a little bit different or perhaps that we've never thought of before and want to try. And they help us to explore new areas in our work, especially now with expanding more into the awareness of consciousness as it is becoming more and more common, and global consciousness. And the third type of presenter, in my mind, are those who stretch our minds. In my opinion, Hans is one of those who will stretch your mind. And so, as me, I need to encourage you to just open your mind, listen, and hear what he has to say. Welcome, Hans. It's good to see you.
Thank you. So I'm almost destined now to change your minds, to open your minds, to do something, to stretch your minds. Okay. I started this field from a personal conviction and to a certain extent, a personal knowledge of past lives. But it became a field, like so many things in life, by accident. Not completely, but yes, largely. I had just published my first book about occultism and mysticism as two poles. Mysticism experiencing the spiritual things, and occultism as studying it and more or less scientific. and apply it in what you can call magic. Anyway, I got 4 reviews, 2 of them very positive and 2 of them very negative. And of course I was agreeing with the positive ones and I was disagreeing with the negative ones, as you can imagine. But the 2 very negative ones had one thing in common. They said, this guy doesn't know the literature. Well, first of all, I was pretty knowledgeable with the literature, but I hadn't bothered too much about quoting, and I was not very much impressed with much of the literature. But I thought, this element I can take. And when I was asked to do a lecture series, my wife said, why for a change you don't lecture about something you know a little bit about, reincarnation? So I decided nobody will ever, I overcompensated. Nobody will ever say that this guy doesn't know the literature. And I started to study, and I wanted to have the best study that ever had been done. So in all the languages that I could read, and I started to collect, and this time before internet, collecting books meant also that you had to go to Paris or to London or to Hay-on-Wye, if that means anything to you in the, how do you call it, in Wales, where are the centers of secondhand bookshops. So I thought I'm going to write a book about it. And in my mind, I had 16 chapters and 16 lectures. And why I had every month a lecture, every fortnight a lecture, I had to prepare the lecture. I was sure that I would force myself to study and write and collect material at speed. And when I was doing that, I think already in first, yes, I came across books, of course, Morris Netterton, Edith Fiore, and in England, Dennis Kelsey. So I had read a bit about it. And when I was doing the lectures, people said, it's all very interesting, Hans, very interesting. We like to hear you do that. But what we really want, we want to remember our own past lives. Could we do that? So I say, let's give it a try. And I am rather proud of a nickname I had in Brazil, where I was working and living for some time, where they called me Hans, vamos experimentar TenDam, which means Hans, let us try out TenDam. Because the Brazilians are very French, and they have a tendency to deduce everything from first principles and go very rational. And the English approach, so to put it very simply, of just trying things out was pretty uncommon for them. So I found out 2 things that were for me discoveries. First, I simply knew how to do it. Of course, I'd read something about it, but you know, when I was a boy, I dreamt that I could play the piano. There was a piano, I would sit, I can't play at all. I would sit and I would try out, and suddenly I could play. And now I had that real experience, not with piano, but with people and doing sessions. And the second discovery was that from the 12 people in the first weekend, 7 got really deep healing of fears and problems they had for the whole life. So this was, I'd read something about it, but I experienced it. So you can imagine there are many people wanted also to have a weekend, and then more people wanted to have a weekend, and then some people started to say, you should teach this to others. And okay, I have a psychology background, but I never did clinical psychology. I had no idea how psychotherapy worked, and I'm so glad I didn't know at all how they did it. What I'm going to present now is my view on where souls come from. And what I think is, I'm not the only one by far, but what is very special for me, I am an intellectual. I'm as rational as I can be. And at the same time, I'm completely open-minded. So I'm going to tell you things from an open mind. And I have to tell you that some of my thoughts are certainly not shared with my colleagues. And the only thing I can say to you is not this all I'm going to tell you is true, but all what I'm going to tell you fits in with the experience I and my colleagues have in practice. So the whole regression is we go back to the origin of something. Why do we do that? If I feel inferior and my uncle is putting me down in an awful way when I'm 11, my feelings of inferiority are strengthened. But the way I react to my uncle is because of my previous experiences. So every experience is a function of what is happening, and let's say my character. But my character is a function also with what happened before and what I did before. So if we talk about inferiority, we want to go back to the first time. Now, sometimes we find that when we go back to the first time, we may go back to the first time on Earth. Our first experience in the body, for example. So my guess is that between 5 and 10% of my clients will go back as far as that. And what do we and how my first experience on Earth as a human being is depends, of course, on what's happening to me. But it depends also where I came from. Because that is our background. Our past is the background with which we face the present. So, in one aspect, this is a far-fetched theme, because we can do many things. We can solve many problems for many people without going back as far as that. But when we do, it can be very relevant. So let me share my screen. Just a moment. My presentation. I have to go back for a moment. Sorry. Okay. So where do humans, where do we come from? I'm not sure if all the discoveries I'm going to share are unexpected, but when I started to discover them, they, for me, were unexpected. And to start with one of the most controversial conclusions that I have, but I believe in that very strongly, the only thing we all have in common is that we inhabit human bodies. And we go from very different directions, which means it's logical that we may continue in very different directions. I don't know anything of that. And my experiences with progressions are not very, I think, very reliable. So I leave that open. So we are people. What are we? And of course, that is an existential question. Sometimes we look in the mirror, but what do we see? Where do we come from? Of course, we are all human. What does that mean? More than an animal. And in some respects, maybe less than an animal, of course. But we have something called intellect. And by the way, I'm not implying that animals have no intellect at all, but it's pretty clear that people have, in general, more intellect than apes. Intellect may be less than instinct. Instinct can be right in the mark. But the interesting thing about intellect is we can develop it. We can share it also between people. We can write it down. I see several people here who, by God, they have libraries. Is there wisdom in that libraries? Not only wisdom, but there certainly is, and there's a lot of knowledge. So we can build on the thinking of other people that have come before us. The famous saying of Newton, that I stand on the shoulders of giants before me. So it goes through the generations. So what is our essence? We can reflect on ourselves. I've been working several years with mentally handicapped children. And this was one of the basic distinctions we made, that many of them recognized themselves in the mirror, but some of them didn't even recognize that. But it means that our identity is shifting. I see myself different now than I saw maybe 20 years ago. When I'm in a different mood, I may have almost a different identity. So, who am I? What are we? Is a pretty philosophical question. But it's also an existential question, especially when we have deep experiences of loneliness or pain. We cannot only wonder about ourselves, but we can start to wonder about our wondering. So what are the most fundamental experiences we have? If I stare into the mirror, it's like I disappear. I see just a face that's staring back to me. And that can be very hollow. It's one of the experiences that existentialists talk about, a kind of almost nothingness. And sometimes there is an incredible fullness, which can be so incredible that we can be one with the divine. However you want to finish that, and whatever the difference between people, but there is a strong similarity in mystical experiences. So the basic mind states we have is sleeping, dreaming, waking, reflecting. And the most problematic reflection is when we feel alienated. Now, one type of alienation is imprisoned, lost in the physical world. I cannot say that I would have discovered reincarnation if I have never read about it, but I can say with absolute complete conviction, I was 6 and I was completely aware. No, with 3 I was already aware. I come from somewhere else. I'm in a strange world here. My first idea about this world is, oh my God, it's a mental asylum. They're all crazy here. Of course, I didn't know the word's mental asylum, but I realized I'm in a world, in a strange world, and people are crazy. There are other types of alienation. This body may feel like it doesn't fit, it's strange, it's heavy. It may make us feel I'm stuck in this world because of my body. And of course, even when I like eating and drinking, I may still feel it's a strange thing. It keeps me stuck. I would like to fly away. I would like to be free. There are other types of alienation. We are lost in a brutal and primitive society. Why do people such horrible things to each other? Why do they kill each other? Why do they torture? Why do they imprison? Why do they steal? Why do they rape? This is crazy. Which means that somewhere I have the memory, even without acknowledging that, without knowing that I have been in a place where this didn't exist. And you may feel lost in your own thinking mind. You may think and analyze till you go crazy. So what's the sort of alienation of people? If that's a problem of a client, we go back to the first cause of alienation. And very often they go back, when this is the problem, to the first lifetime as a human being on Earth. And there we may find the primal trauma. The first experience of pain. By the way, that can be physical pain, that can be psychological pain, it can be mental pain. The kind of pain, the kind of first experience on Earth, by the way, not all first lifetimes are painful. Sometimes they are wonderful, but still they may be strange. So some of the examples I give come from the literature, but all of them, I know of at least a few clients. A lifetime as a primitive human, being hairy, being more or less ape-like. By the way, I recommend that lifetimes. If you ever had one, when it's not too traumatic, it can be wonderful. You know what? Why it's wonderful to be primitive Neanderthal. And by the way, not all Neanderthals are primitive. You don't analyze. You don't think. You don't say, oh my God, why is it so cold today? Cold is cold. Hot is hot. Wet is wet. Pain is pain. You don't plan. You don't. It's like your mind is on a holiday. I'm not sure if I want to go there tomorrow and to in that mind, but it has something refreshing when it is in a regression. One person feels herself in this case, in a life as a gorilla, and she is following people because those people have caught her young. Apparently, bring it to a zoo or something. So this must be not much older than 2,000 years ago. Till they finally are so fed up with her, they kill her. How do we get there? Because when she's going back to her first lifetime on Earth, I'm not sure if I sent her there or that she just arrived there. She is a woman, and her whole life she's searching something, but she has no idea what it is. So when I give the instruction, you will get now an ID, she suddenly experiences this. She is born among humans because she wants to find her baby back. And of course, once in this human body, she has forgotten that. A spaceship crashing, completely different story. An air spirit, so somebody who is in nature without a physical body, but finding interest and pleasure in growing things and blossoming things and animals and waterfall and all that. Fairy type. And suddenly feels slop, and she is sucked, the vacuum cleaner experience, into the womb of a pregnant woman. She has come too close. She was too curious. So it feels like an accident. If it's a true accident, we don't know, because there may be some story behind that she cannot access, but it seems like it's experienced as an accident. Some people say there's a primitive human, but they don't identify with the primitive human. They just feel that they are in the head of that person. and it goes, ow, it's so narrow, it's so hard, it's so small. And at that same time, that primitive human is doing ow, ow, because something happening in the head. And then withdrawal. So the spirit is relaxed again. And the primitive human is relaxed again because he had suddenly a headache and now it's gone and now it's okay. So if I take all these experiences, I think I can take them in 4 types, 4 quadrants. The last experience before being in the human body, it's possible that you were self-aware or not self-aware, that you had already physical body, or that's your first, that you didn't have a physical body or you had a physical body. So in my experience, 90% of my clients are, when they go back before their lifetime on Earth, where were you before this, they feel themselves as, let's call spirits, souls. They are there, they are self-aware, they have a mind. It's even possible that they are more intelligent than they are usually when they are in a physical body. So I call them spirits. And they can be of very many different types. I will go into that in a moment. The second largest group, in my experience, about 10% of people, they come into a physical body, more or less human, but not on this planet. So I call them extraterrestrials. And then less than 1%, much less, I guess. I have only in all these years, I have maybe 10 cases that they come into a mammal. Of all the apes, the great apes, I've only come across gorillas, but maybe that is saying something about me, that I attracted people that, but anyway, elephant, a few, a tiger, a few, how do you call them? Not whales, but dolphins. And if the instruction go further back, if that works with people, they may find themselves in more simple animals. So my guess is there is a kind of development throughout increasing brain size. And it's possible that before the first lifetime on Earth, there is nothing. I call it beginners. I never had them in my practice. I'm pretty sure they are there because of all the work that Stevenson and Jim Tucker have been doing, and other people like that. And the work that has been done by Albert Rochat in France more than 100 years ago, in which he took just people from the street, literally. He gave them tea, warmth, and a few sous, some pennies, and he did hypnotic or magnetic experiments with them. So he would find that a few years before they were born, so when he went before birth, there was nothing, or some vague being, and then he would touch on the death experience of the previous life, and that could be anything between 2 and 20 years before. And when he went before that lifetime, he may find one other lifetime or 2, and that would be it. I am pretty sure they're there, but I cannot say that I'm pretty sure about that because of my experience with my clients. Because I think beginners and mammals don't go to regression therapy usually. So my clients are, there's no reason to assume it's a representative sample of all people looking for past life therapy. But people who are looking for past life therapy are certainly not a representative for people in general. So beginners, no experience whatsoever, whatsoever before the first human lifetime. Development by accumulation of experience. So there is no life review, there's no life planning, nothing like that. Initially, without awareness outside the body, no evaluation after death, no planning before birth. By the way, I'd had 2 or 3 experiences that clarified for me how that can happen, that you fall asleep at death, but then for the first time ever, you stay awake. The most clear-cut example is a young mother dies, and there's only one flaming thought in her: my children, where are they? What's happening to them? And that is so intense, that direction so that they stay awake after death. Mammals, evolution through increasing brain size. It seems to me the most logical explanation. Generally till meeting humans, at least in all my experiences, in the last animal experience, there is a meeting with people. And that meeting with people, there may be hunters, there may be fishers, there may be researchers. They may be meeting with clairvoyant people. This woman, she feels herself like a kind of fairy. Very, very calm, and very, happy in a sense. And she is very interested in animals. She's followed them, and she is floating around and animals, and suddenly she sees this man in a very, how do you call it? In a skin, a bear skin or something. And he is very hairy, has beard, long curly hairs, and he has these huge brown eyes, and those brown eyes are seeing her. And she is amazed. And she sees something so friendly in those brown eyes. She is completely in love. And she becomes his child. And of course, the first time you have this, she's in that baby. That's pretty shocking. Domestic animals, I have no idea if all of them will do it, but at least there are examples of people who feel themselves as a horse or a dog or a cat just before they incarnate for the first time as a human being. And this is what I expect. I'm pretty sure of it, but I cannot confirm it, because even if I'm right, those are the souls, those are the people who will not come easily to a past life therapist. But I'm pretty sure it's like the Stockholm syndrome. If I'm a pig and I've been slaughtered in a slaughterhouse 5 times, 6 times, 7 times, the only way to escape this horror is to go to the other side of the ones who are doing it, because that seems safe. One reason that is a kind of confirmation that pretty often when people die, when they are eaten alive by a crocodile or a tiger, that their soul is hiding after death in the tiger or in the crocodile. The world is so cruel and so horrible, the only safe place is inside the animal. And that gives certain complications afterwards, and those make for very interesting sessions and very powerful healing. Because even a 3-year-old girl who is completely panicking and looking for her mother and doesn't understand why is mother not here and is eaten by a tiger, if that session is processed, if the tiger dies, she has identified as the tiger. But even a 3-year-old girl has a soul that is much stronger than the soul of a tiger. So she will not reincarnate as a tiger, she will reincarnate as a human being, but inside the human being will be the energy of a tiger. those are the most spectacular session and the most spectacular healing, when there is an animal soul trapped inside the human and that is released. I can only tell about that for an hour or something. And sometimes you find people, and it is possible that they see that or experience that because of what they have read, but it can be also just the truth. They see themselves as looking at rocks for ages and ages. And then they see themselves as looking at a plant and how it's growing, or a tree. And then they seem to be identified with animals, and sometimes very small animals. But the impression I get from that is that they are not inside, they're more or less outside. And only when they are becoming interested in animals, they experience themselves more inside the animal. And then by far the biggest group in my experience is that before they come to the first life on earth as a human being, they are in a spiritual world of whatever kind. Some of them are describing worlds or planets that are a little bit like ours, but they're not physical. So people, it looks very much like the state between two lifetimes. So people, they move by thought power. You think about something and you are there. An energy being in space. I'm in space. I'm not at a star or a planet. I'm in space. Do you have a physical body? I don't think so. Okay. Now see yourself from the outside. How somebody like you would see you from the outside, and you see a kind of energy being, a kind of aura. The light people, who was the one who coined that expression? One of our colleagues. I forgot his name for the moment. So they experience themselves as being for example, they are with 5 others, or with 10 others, or with 8 others, and they form a structure. And then comes a being they call usually planners, and the planner says it's time to incarnate. And the big trauma is not to come into a body. The trauma is that the structure is broken up, and now you're on your own. I've come across not many, but quite a number. Awakening in a primordial soup. I call that incubated souls. That seems to be pretty common, at least to my clients. So the first experience is I'm slowly waking up in a field, and the first thing I sense, I'm not alone. There are others like me. And gradually becoming more and more aware. And the others around me are also gradually becoming more and more aware. And once they really become aware of themselves, what's the first thing they're going to do? They start to play with each other. It's a bit childish. And while this is happening, they may sense that somewhere behind me, in the center of this field, there's something divine. And it's usually female, motherly. And it's fantastic. So I'm not only happy by playing, but also there's this wonderful presence that flows through me. And then it's like I'm going more and more farther apart from the others. I go into a kind of border, and then I may be induced or seduced, or I may be stimulated. It's time to go. And it's like you go off a how do you call it? Not a swing. When you glide down, how do you call it? How do you call it when you glide down? What children do in the playground? It's called a slide. No, Janet, what's it called in English? Oh, I can't hear you.
Yes, I think you're talking about a slide coming, slipping down
So they go
into.
sliding down, and then one, they're in the belly of a pregnant woman.
Mhm.
And sometimes they're a bit angry because it's much more limited here, and it's not so playful as it was. And they told me it's good for me, but I don't like this. So they feel a bit tricked. Not all of them. Some of them really go down enthusiastically. Next adventure. Some of them, in my experience, is much more rare. They find themselves in the hands of God. So they become aware first, when they become aware of themselves, that they are with something, someone, something huge. And only later they find out there are others like them. So the previous one, you first experience others like me, there's a kind of collective, and later you experience, oh, there's something behind me. Complete different stories. People who experience themselves as nature spirits. By the way, when I talk about dwarfs and other names, I just use names that are from stories. I'm not saying these are the true names or the right names or whatever. In and below the ground, they're pretty little, and there are many of them. On the ground, sometimes in houses, gnomes, house spirits. They can be mischievous, but they can also be very playful. In the forest, at waterfalls, etc., let them call elves or fairies. This is also increasing intelligence. The most simple ones are on top, and these one elves are, gnomes have a little bit of an inferiority complex. Those people, they are a bit ashamed to find out that they have not been fully human. And elves are, let's say, at our level. And what I call sky spirits, but they are very high. They are between or even over the clouds. And you look at the sea, or they see the landscape, and they are very slow and they are very deep. And if you ask them if they are alone, they are not sure. And after a while, they say, well, there are others like me, but they are over the horizon. Something like that. I think it's rarely that they go into the human body, although I have some interesting experience. And I call them devas, but that's certainly not the right word for it, but local spirits. They are at one place and they live the whole history of that place. And it's a place, let's say there is a rock, a boulder, or there's a tree, and those are the places that people, also primitive people, will sense are special. They're sacred. And it seems that they grow in her mind by just living the complete story of what's happening at that place. Every flower that grows, every grass that grows, every little insect that dies, but certainly also people who come there. And as I'm pretty sure that they will only become human after contact with me, after meeting humans. One girl, he was 14, and she had this deep urge to know where she came from, why she was alive on this planet, in this body. And she finds herself somewhere, my guess is in South America, and she is a gnome. She's living on the ground between the trees, etc. And then the people come and they start to cut down the trees. And they have horrible machines and they make noise. And she's in panic. You're destroying the world, you're destroying them. And of course, they don't listen to them. These guys are usually not very sensitive, no. So Her only is, I have to tell them this is wrong. And then she goes to the people and she's into a woman and she grows up and has only the sense, I am not able to tell what I want. I have no idea what I should tell. And when she is doing a session, it seems to be this is only the second lifetime as a human being. But the start is very, very frustrating. And then we have human extraterrestrials. They may be much shorter. So 125 meters, or much longer. It's about double, 2.5 meters, like that. Very often smaller ears, smaller nose, smaller mouth, very often larger eyes, or they have protective headgear to protect them to COVID and all his nieces and nephews and all the fungus and bacteria and viruses we have. Sometimes we have less fingers or toes. By the way, this is from the internet. I don't consider this a real picture, but it's somehow in an extreme example of what I'm talking about. An even more extreme example, again, these are fantasy pictures. The only thing is, I think they are very overdone, but somehow they seem to me not very unlikely. This is somewhat nearer to us, mainly a different skin, reptile type skin. And there are those who don't even have a human appearance, and I reserve the word aliens for them, so extraterrestrial who are non-human. They may be reptile-like, grasshopper-like, they are green and green-eyed, lobster-like, octopus-like, seems rare, although lately I'm afraid I've met some new ones. And I can tell you it's an extremely interesting session when you have to integrate the octopus with the human. And of course, you have to be absolutely sure that it's their own soul and their own mind. Otherwise, you will saddle them with a horrible obsessor. And sometimes they're robot-like. They feel like they are in a body that is not born, but it's made. It's very mechanical, but somehow they have an awareness. Usually, I think something bad happened. Like they have plucked the soul out of a body and put into a robot. It's very difficult to find out what is true and fantasy here. But the interesting thing is, if you take it seriously, you may be in for a very, very traumatic experience, but afterwards the client may feel relieved is too weak a word. Again, this is just a fantasy from the internet, but I would like to widen our being open for these things. So, I must say, when I started this, I rather often had people who said they came from other planets. And I have learned not to trust the first story. These are the only stories I don't take at face value regularly. For very often the story has been made worse or more glossy, more positive. But anyway, many have been, so what I want, okay, I don't care. Maybe you were an octopus on a planet far, far away. So how come you are now on Earth as a human being? There's a story. As long as the story is not clear, I accept it as a possible story, but I keep that completely open till the story becomes clear. Which means, by the way, that not only mentally they're happening some with the client, but it changes the whole energy of the client to understand why you are here. So how did you come? Why did you come? And why are you still here? Some of them visited us. Some of them had a kind of compassion for the people here. By the way, the main experience of the visitors is that we have a very, very beautiful planet. My guess is that is because we have so much water. The wealth of nature, the richness, the vitality of nature is incredible. For people who come from other planets, they can be shocked, they can be enamored, they can fall in love. People, that's for the first, what's your first impression of Earth? It's a living blue jewel floating in space. Today, I did a session with somebody from India, and she finds herself coming from out of a spaceship, and they're collecting specimen plants. But she becomes completely enamored with the colors and the flowers. She is mesmerized by Earth. And she is so mesmerized that the ship has to leave without her. And then she starts wandering about, and then she finds a human being, a woman, and she's trying to approach her, but she feels much smaller. She's running away, and in the end, she kills herself by jumping off a cliff. And the story behind that, well, that's another story. But many people also, contributors, they find a planet that's much more primitive, and they want to help humanity here. They want to help mankind. Sometimes they come for personal development, and the most common one is they come here to get wet, to take a bath in emotions. If you are in a pretty perfect, peaceful world in which everybody is nice and civilized and smart, there's no need for much emotions. The only emotion that's always there is, let's say, aesthetic emotions like music. But happiness or despair or anger or sadness, they don't have that, apparently, very often. And they need, their soul has dried out. They are more mind than soul. It's kind of rejuvenation, although it may be also pretty painful. Sometimes they come with aggressive or criminal intentions. Oh, this is a planet simple. People are still half animal, and I can become powerful there with my mind, with my superiority. And they may make their own colonies, places on Earth with very high technology and high spirituality, etc., but quite apart from the more primitive parts of the world. My guess is Atlantis is an example of that. Sometimes they are banned, they are exiled. By the way, what's the typical thing for exile? I'm not at home here. I'm a stranger. I'm a stranger in a strange country, in a strange land. But I don't feel at home there, also not completely, for the simple reason they have banned me. They have exiled me. So I'm nowhere at home. Lost or shipwrecked. And then the question, of course, is why didn't you go back? Sometimes there are guilt feelings. I feel responsible for the shipwreck. I can fill a few evenings with just all that kind of stories. And I'm pretty sure that many of you will have at least a few of those stories. Again, this is just a fantasy picture on the internet, but it gives the right type of impression. And then, of course, we have the famous story of Roswell. This is, as far as I know, it's made on the basis of some of the testimony. I can't imagine, I can't know if it is true, but my guess is I have pretty strong sense of being a true story. So if they came to our planet, why did they stay? They may have fallen in love with Earth or with some people on Earth. Some couldn't find a way back. Some had nowhere to go. Some were not allowed to go back. But once they start incarnating here, you get, let's call it karmic entanglements with people, with things you've done, with beautiful things that happened, with awful things that happened, with beautiful things that you did, with beautiful things that was done to you, etc. So once you start incarnating here, apparently you cannot say, okay, I've had enough. For interesting, I go back. At the other hand, it is quite possible, but of course the people that come to our couch, they didn't come back. They didn't go back. So we may have a skewed sample. Now, this is one of the most controversial things, and they are not even estimates, they are guesstimates. My practice, which means of the ones in which we had an experience of the first lifetime on Earth and before that. This is about it. But this is the big if, the guesstimate. I think that maybe half of all the people on Earth are here living for the first time. And maybe 1/3 are mammals. Maybe 1/6 spirits. And maybe 1 or 2% extraterrestrials. I have no idea. But you have to realize that as far as we know, all the people that are alive on the planet are more than all the people lived together in the whole history of mankind. Each number can be halved or doubled, and I don't know. Anyway, I'm sure of one thing. People that think that all the people on Earth are reincarnating, have reincarnated many times, I'm pretty sure that is not true. Hypothesis: the explosion of the world population produces many beginners. If a woman is pregnant, there will be a soul in that fetus, always. It's nature. I don't know where they get it from. My guess is a lot of soul energy is being recycled. A lot of them is coming from animals. I don't know. There may be other sources. The main source of mammal entrants nowadays are pigs who have been slaughtered several times. Why pigs? Because as far as I can deduce from stories, that pigs are more intelligent than cows. Now, my guess is there's also a difference of intelligence between many pigs and between many cows, but I think that pigs, if I would be a pig and I've been slaughtered a couple of times, I've been fed up. It's too hard. I don't want to go on like that. So I will join the other side. That's safer. And at least that fits with the experience of, for example, children that are eaten by animals. They stay inside the animal. At least that's what they do often. The extraterrestrials wake up as a consequence and as a cause of the scientific and technological revolution. So it's also possible that, for example, if 10% of all souls were extraterrestrial, you wouldn't see that, they wouldn't show that. But in our world and our, by the way, I have a general simple rule of thumb. If somebody is interested in science and technology, and also in the spiritual and in how do you call it, parapsychology in that, I will put my hand in the fire, you will find an extraterrestrial. So what we have in common are human bodies. There are this small difference between men and women, but we don't want to go there tonight. And because of a human body, you will develop consciousness and self-awareness. So even if you're a beginner, even if you had some animal experiences before, we can look in a mirror, we can talk back, we sense ourselves. So if you have a spiritual background, it may be that your mind is very limited because of your brain, your physical brain. I usually joke, it's much easier to think if you don't have a brain, at least when you're not incarnated. But certainly having a brain is for beginners a kind of scaffolding to build a mind. So a brain may be a prison, but a brain is also a womb that may produce mind. For beginners, the human body, it means evolution. They will evolve. For mammals, it means mental evolution. For spirits, it means separateness and involution. And for extraterrestrial, it has nothing new. It may be a new opportunity or rejuvenation. Or, how do you call it? They are convicts. They are banished. So people that have been spirits, interestingly, they are usually more frightened by birth than by death. I mean, you may be frightened by the process of dying, by the death experience, but to be death is in a sense a release. I realized not so long ago what for me, my personal association with being death in a couple of years. Oh, I will be finally able to work. The working at the other side is so much more, I was almost going to say unlimited. I know that's a half-truth, by the way, but that's the sense I have. You look for the first life review. They may have a hangover or a trauma for being in a body. Look for the first body trauma, physical pain, physical wound. The exteriors rise easily. These are the people that when they are in shock, they leave their body, which for us and for most of our clients is the most natural thing to do. And the only problem is that we are not taught at school that when that happened, how you can come back properly inside your body. So by the way, if there is danger, the most common sense of extraterrestrials is to fight, to protect, to fight back. With spirits, it's exteriorize, to go back, to go after death, or to withdraw. That's especially for animals, they withdraw inside the body. It's like they go back before birth because that's safe. First response to frustration, leave the body. If it seemed an extraterrestrial, primary emotion about Earth, what's your first sense of Earth, your first experience? Did they arrive in a body, or did they arrive because they died somewhere else and couldn't find the way back there? Are they here of their own volition or not? And in this case, the first story is not always true. It's almost like there's some politics. First response to frustration, defense. Our society is primitive, and people use the word primitive about the world, about other people. That's not a surefire, but it's an indication that you can expect this kind of background. People are primitive. Interest in science, technology, and parapsychology. Now, there's one interesting thing of incarnation. It's childhood. We may have had a childhood as a soul, so to speak, but every time we incarnate, we have a childhood period. And as we all know, that is a period in which many wounds, many traumas can register. But it's also a fantastic period, an innocent period, a spontaneity. It's a wonderful bath. If childhood is okay, it's a wonderful gift that we would never have experienced if it was not for incarnating in a body. And also the feelings we can have as parents towards our children or towards children in general, they are precious, they are special. So incarnation, the process is certainly not only for karma and all that stuff. It's also a bath in innocence, spontaneity, and all that. So a good childhood is wonderful. Like a bad childhood is horrible. Anyway, please don't stop incarnating on Earth till you had at least one gloriously happy childhood. One glorious, happy adulthood, parenthood that experience also. And of course, the physical world is heavy and the physical body can be very physical. As they say, in heaven there's no beer, so we drink it here. So many souls, many origins, many journeys, one overcrowded planet. Ready for comments and questions. Georgina.
Hi, that was fascinating. Thank you so much. So many aspects that are curdling around in my mind. One group that I have encountered that you didn't mention of extraterrestrials were the avians.
The what? Aliens?
Avians, bird-like people, avians.
That's right. I heard about them. I never came across them.
Yeah, I have encountered them. Yeah, and they're beautiful.
Okay.
But yeah.
Again, by the way, even if the story is crazy, I take it as probably true. But I'm waiting for the story how they got from there to here. So as long as that story is completely vague, it's not there, I still have the thing in my mind that it may be a fantasy story. But even if it's a fantasy story, it's a fantasy story for a reason. So you should never denounce it.
Oh, sure, it's a metaphor.
But very often, that things that I would assume in the beginning were fantasy, they were part of a good, convincing, real story. Yes.
But
so everything goes.
Sure, of course, because it's their story, right? The avians and the others, from what I've learned over doing this work, not as long as you, but in a different level, different type of work, come from different planets. So the avians come from a different planet.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so
There's not one planet over there. No.
it's all
Very,
lots.
very different planets.
Yeah.
By the way, if you are very short or very long, there's a very simple explanation for that. It's the
Gravity.
gravity. If there's a higher gravity than here, they're shorter. And if there's less gravity here, they're longer.
Yeah. Mhm. Thank you. That's
By the
terrific.
way, just today I had a session in which I refer to that person that was stuck here. He was fascinated, mesmerized by the planet. So in the end, we have to personify that past life, and so this woman is looking to the past life much larger. And the only way we could integrate that she went behind it, and that she had to grow to the same size. And interestingly, while she was growing to the same size, she had this wonderful smile on her face. It was so good to come back into shape. And then she could embrace and hold it. Okay.
Cool. Yeah.
Any other remark or story or?
Mhm.
Yes, Virginia. Can't hear you. Please unmute yourself.
Forgive
Yes.
me, my dog was barking and I didn't want anyone to hear him. All right, many years ago, before I got into all of this in the early 80s, I was told that there are beings who are here to hide. They are not human, but they are disguised. So if you saw them, you wouldn't know. And there are beings here who are hunting them. And that's why they're hiding. They're different groups that they've come here. They're not particularly interested in Earth or humanity. They're either hiding or they're trying to find their prey.
Mm-hmm.
Heard of that?
I have heard of it once or twice. I've never encountered something like that in sessions, so I have no view on it at all.
Okay.
But I've always these two minds. This may be fantasy, but if it's fantasy, it's fantasy. There's something behind fantasy.
Right.
Or I may think it's fantasy and it's true. Or it is any mixture of truth and fantasy. So let's keep an open mind.
Thank you.
But of course, if this has an effect on people, it becomes a part of their own identity, then it becomes possible work for a regression therapist. Yeah.
Okay.
By the way, I'm not a hunter, I'm a vegetarian. Michael.
Do you think that there is perhaps a team of souls that reincarnate at different times when it's necessary to assist those that may not have as high a connection in transitions, like right now on Earth?
I think it has always been the case. And that may be today more the case than before. Even if you go back to the first research of Helen Wembeck, Life Before Life, to go with a purpose, to come with a purpose, to special assist some development, and to come as a group, they was already mentioned there. If I remember, it's about 1/4 of our respondents have said something in that vein.
Thank you.
Yeah. Janet.
The discussions reminded me of a time many years ago when a colleague was doing a regression on me. And all that I remember of that experience was that it appeared to be souls moving into the earth. My space, my idea seemed to be from Lemuria. And so the only experience that I had was that I felt like I was coming into this different space, just coming down. That's the best way for me to say it.
Into this reality of ours.
Yes, yes. And as I got closer, and the energy field was so very, very different, and as I began to see what I was moving into in the regression, I said, that's physical?
I see,
That's
yeah.
physical? And I immediately shut back.
Oh my
up.
God, they told me about it, but it's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's pretty clear you come from a non-physical space, being,
Right.
reality. Yeah.
Right. And I shut up, and I don't think I came back for a long, long time.
Yeah, I see. It's pretty shock. One of my favorite stories is this guy, his first lifetime is as an Inuit, Eskimo. His wife grows ill, so he put her on the sledge with the dogs, and they have to go to the medicine man. And it takes 1 day and a half day before he is there. And when he arrives, his wife has died. And he is mad with anger. This stupid world, that it takes time to go from A to B. So that was his primal trauma. Damn it, it takes time to go from A to B. He was accustomed, when I'm at A, I think of B, I'm in B. So he was not accustomed to the physical world. That's pretty clear.
Mhm.
So in this case, the funny thing almost is, it's not about pain and the body and the limit, but that it takes time to go from one place to another. Shocking. He was almost offended. This is another aspect of, is this physical? Yes, ladies and gentlemen, this is physical. It takes time to go from A to B, and you have these strange things with appendices and extremities and all that. And if I slap myself, it feels different than if I slap you. Which must means that this body, I'm different in it than, oh, in that body there are also people inside, apparently, etc. So, by the way, the experiences that we step out of the limits of the physical world are so mystic, are so intense, are so life-changing, mind-changing. Sometimes so relaxing.
It looked like Peter might have had a question or a comment. Oh, no? Okay.
It may be just the way he looks. Any other? There are only two things I can do. Three things I can do. I can tell stories, I can answer questions, or I can shut up. So it's your choice.
This is great. I wanted to just say that I appreciate your stories and that I've had a number of similar experiences with clients and so forth. And I love listening to you tell them. It's great. Thank you. Really wonderful.
So one of the things I like, stories I like to hear most, when, for example, we have new students in the program, that they say, oh my God, they are as crazy as I am. I feel at home. I recognize the stories. I thought that there are more people that have those crazy stories. And apparently they are not crazy at all. So I'm not crazy at all. I have this fantasy, which is probably just a fantasy, but it's a meaningful fantasy. I have the fantasy that when one day or 1 million years, the universe starts to close down, that it will not end before every soul has shared its stories with other souls. It's like the world is going dark, there are big campfires, and there are people around them, and they share stories. And my guess is that time is still very far off. But of course, I don't know. The essence of regression is the client is able to tell his or her story and understand the plot. This happened, and then this happened, and then I reacted this, and then I came back as a woman, and then this happened, and I met this, and it starts to fit. So one of the things I recommend, and I don't think any student has ever taken that recommendation seriously, is to take a course in script writing for movies. By the way, if I think of artists, the artists that I have most commonly experienced, met as clients and even as students are from the movie industry. And my guess there is a relationship between movies, there's also kind of storytelling. What's his name? This famous Hitchcock. Hitchcock said, a movie is just daily life minus the dull moments. So that's what we do in regressions. We don't take 17 years to find out the childhood of someone from birth to 70 years. We take the snapshots. We find the meaningful snapshots. And of course, we don't instruct the client to which point to go. It has to come from the client him or herself. But every snapshot is a meaningful image. And my guess is, but I really don't know, that it would be impossible to do our kind of regression therapy. It would have been impossible 200 years ago, because people know movies. They are accustomed. They see somebody entering a building, and the next moment they see him discussing with the director. And then they see the same thing, but now from another person. We are so accustomed with these images and how we can connect them. We can even go, how do you call it? We can go back. Certainly we can go back. Two people meet each other, and then we see how they met 20 years ago for the first time. Or somebody is looking very pensively at the house that he's leaving, and suddenly we see how the same person as a young person entered that house for the first time. We are accustomed to this way of thinking. And of course, movies can only be created in a way that people can understand. But they also develop our ability. If I say to a client, see the situation from above, we used to call that bird's eye view. Today I call it drone view. Good. People can do that. And it's possible that 300 years ago, you said, see it from above. They would have thought, what are you talking about? They can't see it from above.
What about theater, Hans?
Sorry?
What about theater? Theater is ancient, right? People.
Oh, yeah.
At
least,
and they.
that was much more limited, but still, the whole concept of catharsis comes from the old Greek plays, the tragedies. Or is that not what you meant?
No, that what I was saying is that the people had an imagination and can create out of nothing, and create plays and create circumstances, create meetings. They can create their version of their image of a bird flying above, with the view of that bird looking down. So
my guess is that has to do with shamans.
Yeah,
They were
so,
trained. It was an initiation to be able to do that.
right. So what I'm suggesting is that the brain has that capability
Okay. Yeah,
before,
yeah, sure.
before
Sure.
movies. Before
Sure.
movies. I think the brain is much more capable than we ever give it credit for.
Anyway, I find movie words very helpful. I may say very often when things become very important and they have a tendency to become confused, see it in slow motion or see it in ultra slow motion. So it's a language that's easier, but I think you're right. It's not that the brain in former times didn't have the same capabilities it had.